PTE Academic, Summarized Spoken Text Practice Tests Part 2.
ACE. PTE Academic.
You will hear a short lecture. Write a summary for a fellow student who was not present at the lecture. You should write 50 to 70 words. You have 10 minutes to finish each task. Your response will be judged on the quality of your writing and how well your response presents the key points presented. End the lecture. This video has 10 lectures. Pause the video at the end of each lecture and write the summary.
Summarize Spoken Text Practice Test 4.
Education is the discipline that is concerned with methods of teaching and learning in schools or school-like environments as opposed to various non-formal and informal means of socialization, for example, rural development projects and education through parent-child relationships. Education can be thought of as the transmission of the values and accumulated knowledge of a society. In this sense, it is equivalent to what social scientists term socialization or enculturation. Children, whether conceived among New Guinea tribespeople, the Renaissance Florentines, or the Middle Classes of Manhattan, are born without culture. Education is designed to guide them in learning a culture, molding the behavior in the ways of adulthood, and directing them toward their eventual role in society. In the most primitive cultures, there is often little formal learning, little of what one would ordinarily call school or classes or teachers. Instead, the entire environment and all activities are frequently viewed as school and classes, and many or all adults act as teachers. As societies grow more complex, however, the quantity of knowledge to be passed on from one generation to the next becomes more than any one person can know, and, hence, there must evolve more selective and efficient means of cultural transmission. The outcome is formal education, the school and the specialist called the teacher. As society becomes ever more complex and schools become ever more institutionalized, educational experience becomes less directly related to daily life, less a matter of showing and learning in the context of the war-a-day world, and more abstracted from practice, more a matter of distilling, telling, and learning things out of context. This concentration of learning in a formal atmosphere allows children to learn far more of the culture than they are able to do by merely observing and imitating. As society gradually attaches more and more importance to education, it also tries to formulate the overall objectives, content, organization, and strategies of education. Literature becomes laden with advice on the rearing of the younger generation. In short, there develop philosophies and theories of education.
Summarize Spoken Text Practice Test 5.
Religion is human beings' relation to what they regard as holy, sacred, absolute, spiritual, divine, or worthy of a special reverence. It is also commonly regarded as consisting of the way people deal with ultimate concerns about their lives and the fate after death. In many traditions, this relation and these concerns are expressed in terms of one's relationship with or attitude toward gods or spirits. In more humanistic or naturalistic forms of religion, they are expressed in terms of one's relationship with or attitudes toward the broader human community or the natural world. In many religions, texts are deemed to have scriptural status, and people are esteemed to be invested with spiritual or moral authority. Believers and worshippers participate in and are often enjoined to perform devotional or contemplative practices such as prayer, meditation, or particular rituals. Worship, moral conduct, right belief, and participation in religious institutions are among the constituent elements of the religious life.
For more exercises and tutorials for PTE, subscribe to our channel and press the notifications bell.
Summarize Spoken Text Practice Test 6.
Hinduism is a major world religion originating on the Indian subcontinent and comprising several and varied systems of philosophy, belief, and ritual. Although the name Hinduism is relatively new, having been coined by British writers in the first decades of the 19th century, it refers to a rich cumulative tradition of texts and practices, some of which date to the 2nd millennium BCE or possibly earlier. If the Indus Valley Civilization, 3rd–2nd millennium BCE, was the earliest source of these traditions, as some scholars hold, then Hinduism is the oldest living religion on Earth. Its many sacred texts in Sanskrit and vernacular languages served as a vehicle for spreading the religion to other parts of the world, though ritual and the visual and performing arts also played a significant role in its transmission. From about the 4th century CE, Hinduism had a dominant presence in Southeast Asia, one that would last for more than 1,000 years. More strikingly than any other major religious community, Hindus accept, and indeed celebrate, the organic, multileveled, and sometimes pluralistic nature of the Trinity. Ons. This expansiveness is made possible by the widely shared Hindu view that truth or reality cannot be encapsulated in any creedal formulation, a perspective expressed in the Hindu prayer, "May good thoughts come to us from all sides." Thus, Hinduism maintains that truth must be sought in multiple sources, not dogmatically proclaimed.
Summarize spoken text practice test 7.
Christianity, a major religion, stemmed from the life, teachings, and death of Jesus of Nazareth, the Christ, or the Anointed One of God, in the 1st century CE. It has become the largest of the world's religions and, geographically, the most widely diffused of all faiths. It has a constituency of more than 2 billion believers. Its largest groups are the Roman Catholic Church, the Eastern Orthodox Churches, and the Protestant Churches. The Oriental Orthodox Churches constitute one of the oldest branches of the tradition but had been out of contact with Western Christianity and Eastern Orthodoxy from the middle of the 5th century until the late 20th century because of a dispute over Christology, the doctrine of Jesus Christ's nature and significance. Significant movements within the broader Christian world and sometimes transcending denominational boundaries are Pentecostalism, charismatic Christianity, evangelicalism, and fundamentalism. In addition, there are numerous independent churches throughout the world.
For more exercises and tutorials for PTE, subscribe to our channel and press the notifications bell.
Summarize spoken text practice test 8.
Human rights are the natural rights that belong to an individual or group of individuals simply for being human. Whatever their theoretical justification, human rights refer to a wide continuum of values or capabilities thought to enhance human agency or protect human interests and declared to be universal in character, in some sense equally claimed for all human beings, present and future. It is a common observation that human beings everywhere require the realization of diverse values or capabilities to ensure their individual and collective well-being. It also is a common observation that this requirement, whether conceived or expressed as a moral or a legal demand, is often painfully frustrated by social as well as natural forces, resulting in exploitation, oppression, persecution, and other forms of deprivation. Deeply rooted in these twin observations are the beginnings of what today are called human rights, and the national and international legal processes associated with them. The expression human rights is relatively new, having come into everyday parlance only since World War II, the founding of the United Nations in 1945, and the adoption by the UN General Assembly of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. It replaced the phrase natural rights, which fell into disfavor in the 19th century in part because the concept of natural law.
Summarize spoken text practice test 9.
Superstition is a belief, half-belief, or practice for which there appears to be no rational substance. Those who use the term imply that they have certain knowledge or superior evidence for their own scientific, philosophical, or religious convictions. An ambiguous word, it probably cannot be used except subjectively. With this qualification in mind, superstitions may be classified roughly as religious, cultural, and personal. Every religious system tends to accumulate superstitions as peripheral beliefs. A Christian, for example, may believe that in time of trouble he will be guided by the Bible if he opens it at random and reads the text that first strikes his eye. Often one person's religion is another one's superstition. The Roman Emperor Constantine referred to some non-Christian practices as superstition. The Roman historian Tacitus called Christianity a pernicious superstition. Roman Catholic veneration of relics, images, and the saints is dismissed as superstitious by many Protestants. Christians regard many Hindu practices as superstitious. And adherents of all higher religions may consider Australian Aboriginal people's relation to the totem superstitious. Finally, all religious beliefs and practices may seem superstitious to the person without religion. Superstitions that belong to a cultural tradition, in some cases inseparable from religious superstition, are enormous in their variety. Many persons, in nearly all times, have held, seriously or half-seriously, irrational beliefs concerning methods of warding off ill or bringing good, foretelling the future, and healing or preventing sickness or accident. A few specific folk traditions, such as belief in the evil eye or in the efficacy of amulets, have been found in most periods of history and in most parts of the world. Others may be limited to one country, region, or village, to one family, or to one social or vocational group.
Summarize spoken text practice test 10.
Parenting is the process of raising children and providing them with protection and care in order to ensure their healthy development into adulthood. The long-standing assumption that parents exert a direct and powerful influence on the children through the process of socialization has permeated research and theory on human development as well as most cultural belief systems. If children turn out well, it is to the parents' credit; if they turn out badly, it is the parents' fault. Researchers who study the significance of parenting emphasize several issues. First, in biologically related families, genetic and socialization influences are difficult to separate. For example, a child who is musically talented may have inherited that tendency from parents who are also musically gifted. Those same parents would be likely to emphasize music at home, which makes it difficult to determine whether the musical child is a product of genetics, the environment, or, most likely, both working together. If instead that child was adopted and is being raised by parents who are not musically inclined, the expression of that talent might take a different form or might be actively suppressed. Second, the stream of influence between parents and children is bidirectional rather than unidirectional. For example, from parent to child. A parent who is impatient may cause an infant to react with distress, but an infant who is constitutionally prone to distress may elicit impatience from the parent. Finally, parents play a significant role in shaping children's environments and thus children's exposure to other factors that influence development, such as peer relationships. For example, parents are much more likely than children to make decisions about the neighborhood in which the family resides, the schools that children attend, and many of the activities in which children engage. In these ways, parents expose children to certain peers and not others. Additionally, children are more likely to select friends who have similar interests and values, which are rooted primarily in early family experiences.
For more exercises and tutorials for PTE, subscribe to our channel and press the notifications bell.
Summarize spoken text practice test 11.
Sports are physical contests pursued for the goals and challenges they entail. Sports are part of every culture. Each culture has its own definition of sports. The most useful definitions are those that clarify the relationship of sports to play, games, and contests. Play, wrote the German theorist Karl Diem, is purposeless activity, for its own sake, the opposite of work. Humans work because they have to, they play because they want to. Play is autotelic, that is, it has its own goals. It is voluntary and uncoerced. Recalcitrant children compelled by the parents or teachers to compete in a game of football, soccer, are not really engaged in a sport. Neither are professional athletes if their only motivation is the paycheck. In the real world, as a practical matter, motives are frequently mixed and often quite impossible to determine. Unambiguous definition is nonetheless a prerequisite to practical determinations about what is and is not an example of play. There are at least two types of play. The first is spontaneous and unconstrained. Examples abound. A child sees a flat stone, picks it up, and sends it skipping across the waters of a pond. An adult realizes with a laugh that he has uttered an unintended pun. Neither action is premeditated, and both are at least relatively free of constraint. The second type of play is regulated. There are rules to determine which actions are legitimate and which are not. These rules transform spontaneous play into games, which can thus be defined as rule-bound or regular. TED play. Leapfrog, chess, playing house, and basketball are all games, some with rather simple rules, others governed by a somewhat more complex set of regulations. In fact, the rule books for games such as basketball are hundreds of pages long.
Summarize spoken text practice test 12.
Drug abuse implies the excessive or addictive use of drugs for non-medical purposes despite social, psychological, and physical problems that may arise from such use. Abused substances include such agents as anabolic steroids, which are used by some athletes to accelerate muscular development and increase strength and which can cause heart disease, liver damage, and other physical problems, and psychotropic agents, substances that affect the user's mental state and are used to produce changes in mood, feeling, and perception. The latter category, which has a much longer history of abuse, includes opium, and such derivatives as heroin, hallucinogens, barbiturates, cocaine, amphetamines, tranquilizers, the several forms of cannabis, and alcohol. The history of non-medical drug consumption is ancient. The discovery of the mood-altering qualities of fermented fruits and substances such as opium has led to the use and, often, acceptance into society. Just as alcohol has a recognized social place in the West, so many other psychotropics have been accepted in different societies. The major problem that arises from the consumption of psychotropic drugs is dependence, the compulsion to use the drug despite any deterioration in health, work, or social activities. Dependence varies from drug to drug in its extent and effect, it can be physical or psychological or both. Physical dependence becomes apparent only when the drug intake is decreased or stopped and an involuntary illness called the withdrawal or abstinence syndrome occurs. Drugs known to produce physical dependence are the opiates, i.e., opium and its derivatives, and central nervous system depressants such as barbiturates and alcohol. Psychological dependence is indicated when the user relies on a drug to produce a feeling of well-being. This type of dependence varies widely with both substance and user. In its most intense form, the user becomes obsessed with the drug and focuses virtually all his interest and activity on obtaining and using it.
Summarize spoken text practice test 13.
Nuclear weapons are fundamentally different from conventional weapons because of the vast amounts of explosive energy they can release and the kinds of effects they produce, such as high temperatures and radiation. The prompt effects of a nuclear explosion and fallout are well known through data gathered from the attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan, from more than 500 atmospheric and more than 1,500 underground nuclear tests conducted worldwide, and from extensive calculations and computer modeling. Longer-term effects on human health and the environment are less certain but have been extensively studied. The impacts of a nuclear explosion depend on many factors, including the design of the weapon, fission or fusion, and its yield. Whether the detonation takes place in the air and at what altitude, on the surface, underground, or underwater, the meteorological and environmental conditions, and whether the target is urban, rural, or military.
For answers key, please watch the part 3 of this series. Thank you.
For more exercises and tutorials for PTE, subscribe to our channel and press the notifications bell.